The restaurant was always full during dinner time. Expensive lights hung from the ceiling, soft music played in the background, and the smell of grilled steaks filled the air. Customers wore suits and dresses. Laughter and small talk echoed across the room. But one person moved quietly through it all. It's almost invisible. A young waitress with tired eyes and a polite smile. She wasn't fast like the others. She didn't joke with customers or chat with coworkers. She just did her job, table by table, step by step. Her name was never on anyone's lips. Most people didn't even notice her, but those who looked closely could see something different about her. The way she carried herself was calm and graceful, like someone who had once been confident. Her hands, though holding plates and glasses, moved with surprising care, like they remembered something they hadn't done in a long time. She had worked at this restaurant for almost 2 years now. Every shift, she came in early and left late. She took extra hours whenever she could. She didn't complain, not even when her legs ached or when rude customers spoke down to her. She needed the money. Mother was sick, and bills were piling up. Rent, medicine, food, it all added up too quickly. She had given up many things when life became hard. One of those things was music. Years ago, before everything changed, she had been a piano student. A good one. Some even said gifted. She used to sit for hours, practicing keys and chords, dreaming of big stages and bright lights. She had played in small halls and school competitions, always bringing tears to people's eyes. But after her father died suddenly, everything fell apart. She was just a teenager then, and her mother needed help. There was no time or money left for music. Now the piano was just a memory. And in this restaurant, no one knew about that part of her life. At the far end of the restaurant, there was a grand piano, sat there, polished and silent, mostly used by hired musicians on weekends. On weekdays, it was just part of the decor. A quiet reminder of the elegance the place wanted to show. She passed that piano every day while working, but never touched it. Never even looked at it for too long. A part of her life was over. But fate has strange ways of reminding people who they are. One evening, a man walked in. He wore a dark suit, shiny shoes, and a silver watch that looked more expensive than most people's cars. He didn't smile. He didn't talk much. He sat alone at a corner table, scanning the menu like it bored him. When the waitress walked up to take his order, he gave her a short nod and ordered without looking at her. But as the evening went on, he kept watching her, not in a rude way, but with quiet curiosity. He noticed the way she walked, the way her hands moved when setting down dishes. There was something about her that didn't fit this place. He overheard one of the younger waiters mention, in passing, that she used to play piano. The man raised an eyebrow. He didn't say anything right away. But in his mind, a little spark lit up. Something told him there was more to this quiet girl than anyone in the room realized. And soon, he would find out the truth in the most unexpected way. The man in the dark suit kept watching the waitress as she moved from table to table. He noticed how quiet she was. She didn't rush, didn't laugh loudly like the others, but she had a certain calm that made her different. Hands didn't shake when carrying full trays. Her footsteps were steady. And her eyes, they looked tired, yes, but not empty. There was something else in them. Something held back. He had seen a lot of people in his life. People who wanted things. Fame, money, attention. He could tell when someone was pretending. And when someone was real, and this girl was not pretending, she didn't care about being noticed. She just wanted to get through the night and go home. A waiter came by to refill his water and made a joke about her. He said she used to be some kind of piano genius before ending up here. The man didn't laugh. He only raised an eyebrow. He sat back in his chair and glanced across the room. The piano stood quietly in the corner, untouched. He turned his gaze to the girl again. That idea was stuck in his head now. A piano genius working as a waitress. Most people would laugh it off. But he had seen strange things before. Life didn't always go in straight lines. He waited until she came to his table. Again, "Do you really play the piano?" he asked, not looking up from his drink. She paused for a moment. "Used to," she said softly. "You any good?" She gave a small smile. but it didn't reach her eyes. That was a long time ago. He leaned back and glanced at the piano. Again, why don't you show me? She looked confused. I'm just serving tables. He tilted his head, thinking. Then he said, loud enough for a few nearby people to hear, if you play something right now and it's even halfway good, I'll leave $1,000 tip. The people at nearby tables turned their heads. The room didn't go completely silent, but the energy shifted. A few waiters stopped to listen. The girl stood still for a few seconds. She didn't laugh. She didn't walk away. But she didn't move toward the piano either. $1,000, he repeated. It's just one piece. Any piece you want. More. People were now paying attention. Some leaned forward in their seats. Others whispered. No one had ever seen anything like this in the restaurant before. She looked around and saw all the eyes on her. Her face turned red. Her hands fidgeted with the notepad she held. She could have said no. Walked away. But something inside her stirred. A tiny flame, long buried. I haven't played in years, she said. Then it should be interesting. The man said calmly, crossing his arms. The restaurant manager was nearby, watching. He gave her a nod. It was clear she wouldn't get in trouble for trying. She felt her heart beating faster. Her legs were heavy. Her throat was dry. But somehow, she walked toward the piano. The room became quieter as she approached. A few people took out their phones. One couple whispered, "She's really going to do it?" She sat down on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Her reflection stared back at her from the glossy black surface. So many memories came rushing in at once. Recitals, competitions, long nights of practice. And then the silence after her father passed. The silence that never left. She took a deep breath. She didn't know what would happen next, but she placed her fingers on the keys anyway. She sat still for a moment, her back straight, her hands resting just above the keys. It had been so long since she had touched a piano. Years, in fact. She wasn't sure if her fingers even remembered how to play. Her heart was beating too fast. Her stomach twisted with nerves. The room around her had gone quiet now. Conversations had stopped. Forks and knives rested on plates. Even the waiters stood still. Some leaned on the counters. Others peeked from behind the kitchen door. Everyone was waiting to see what the quiet waitress would do next. She closed her eyes for a second and took a deep breath. She tried to block out the whispers, the stares, the man watching her from the corner table. She tried to remember who she used to be. The girl who once sat in front of a piano lost in music. The girl who played not for money or attention, but because it was the only thing that made her feel alive. Her fingers pressed down softly on the first keys. The sound was gentle, almost like a whisper. Notes floated into the air. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They simply ... spoke. And suddenly, the room leaned in just a little more. She didn't pick a flashy song or something famous. She played something personal. A piece she had written herself many years ago. Something she never shared with anyone. A melody full of feeling, full of memories, some good, some painful. Each note felt like a piece of her story being told without words. People began to sit up straighter. They weren't just listening. They were feeling. The man in the suit who had dared her slowly uncrossed his arms. His eyes fixed on her hands, then her face, then the piano again. He had expected a simple tune, maybe a few wrong notes. But this was something else entirely. There was something haunting and beautiful in the way she played. Her fingers moved with quiet confidence even though her eyes were closed. It was as if the music was leading her. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress. She simply let the piano speak for her. A woman at a nearby table wiped her eyes. A young couple held hands under the table, forgetting about their dessert. Even the chef had come out of the kitchen and stood silently by the wall, arms crossed, listening with a strange look on his face. The girl didn't see any of this. She was lost in the sound. In her mind, she was back in her small room at home. Back when things were still okay. Back when her father used to stand in the doorway and listen with pride. She remembered his smile, the way he nodded during her practice sessions. That memory filled her chest with warmth and pain. As the final notes of the piece faded, she slowly opened her eyes. For a moment, there was complete silence, not a sound, not a word. And then someone clapped, then another. And suddenly, the entire restaurant burst into applause. Loud and full of surprise, people stood from their chairs. Some even whistled. It wasn't polite clapping. It was real, full-hearted appreciation. She looked up, confused and overwhelmed. Her face turned red, and she didn't know what to do. With her hands, she stood slowly, unsure of what to say, and gave a tiny bow without meaning to. She looked toward the man in the suit. He wasn't clapping, but he was staring at her. His face unreadable, and in that moment everything had changed. She stood beside the piano, frozen. Her cheeks were warm, her hands slightly shaking. The sound of clapping still echoed in her ears, but she didn't know how to react. All she had done was play something from her past, something she had locked away a long time ago. She didn't expect people to care. She definitely didn't expect them to stand and cheer. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She looked down at the keys once more, her fingers still tingling. Then slowly, she turned and started walking back toward the staff area. People nodded at her as she passed, some smiling, others whispering to each other. One man even said that was beautiful as she walked by. She just gave a small nod and kept moving, unsure how to take the attention. The manager caught her near the kitchen door and whispered, "Where were you hiding that all this time?" She didn't answer. She just gave a tired smile and stepped into the kitchen to breathe. Inside, the kitchen staff stared at her like they had never seen her before. One of the cooks gave her a thumbs up. Another just said, "Wow," she wanted to disappear. Not because she was embarrassed, but because she wasn't used to the light being on her. She had lived in the shadows for so long, serving water, picking up dishes, blending into the background. Now for the first time, people saw her. Back out in the restaurant, the man in the suit still sat quietly at his table. He hadn't touched his dessert. He hadn't looked at his phone. He just sat there, staring at the piano like it had told him a secret. When she came back out a few minutes later, he raised his hand slightly. She didn't want to walk over, but it was her job, so she did. He looked at her carefully, then slid a white envelope across the table. She didn't take it right away. "What's this?" she asked, her voice low. "My tip," he said, "for the music." She hesitated, then slowly picked it up. It felt heavier than she expected. "You played like someone who has lived 100 years, he said softly, looking at her like he was trying to figure her out. "Where did you learn that?" She shrugged. "Mostly at home. Before... things changed." He nodded but didn't ask more. "You gave everyone in this room something real tonight. They came for food, and they got something better?" She didn't know what to say, so she just gave a quiet thank you and turned to leave. But before she walked away, he said, "Do you still want to play?" She stopped and looked back at him. "I don't know," she replied honestly. He leaned forward. "I think you do." She didn't answer. Later that night, when the restaurant closed and the lights dimmed, she finally opened the envelope. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the bills. It wasn't just 1,000. It was more, much more. She counted it twice just to be sure. Her heart raced. That money could cover a month's rent. It could pay for her mother's medicine. It was more than just a tip. It was hope. But more than the money, it was what the man said that stayed with her. "Do you still want to play?" She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, her old piano. At home was broken, the keys uneven, the sound dull. But maybe it was time to fix it. Maybe it was time to believe in that part of herself again. Maybe, it's just maybe music wasn't finished with her yet. The next few days at the restaurant felt different. People still came for food, still laughed over wine, still talked about business and birthdays. But there was a new energy in the air. Some customers looked at the piano more often. Few even asked, "Is that girl playing again tonight?" The waitress heard these whispers, but she didn't respond. She continued her work as usual, quiet, careful, focused. Ow! But something had changed inside her. After years of pushing music away, something in her had woken up. was small and unsure. But it was alive again. Each night after her shift, she came home to her small apartment and sat in front of her old piano. It was dusty, a few keys were chipped, and the sound wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She wiped it down gently and began pressing the keys again. The first time, she only played for 5 minutes. Her fingers were stiff and the notes came out, slow and uneven, but she didn't stop. The next night, she played longer, then longer still. Her fingers remembered more than she thought. Old songs, forgotten melodies. And new ideas all came back to her like a friend who had been waiting. Her mother, resting on the couch wrapped in a blanket, smiled every time she heard the music. She said softly, "I miss this part of you." The waitress didn't answer. She just smiled back and kept playing. Back at the restaurant, something else was happening. The man in the suit came. Back, not once, but twice. Then 3 nights in a row. He didn't sit at the same table each time, but he always watched her. He didn't say much, just ordered his meal and stayed longer than most guests. The other staff noticed. One waiter joked, "Looks like you have a fan." She only smiled politely and brushed it off, but deep inside, she wondered what he was thinking. One evening after his meal, he asked to speak to her for just a minute. She hesitated, but agreed. He stood near the piano as she approached. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her, "that you don't know if you still want to play." She waited quietly, unsure of what he wanted. "I think you do," he said again, "and I think people need to hear it." She looked down at the keys, then back at him. "It's just something I used to do. I'm not anyone special." "That's where you're wrong," he replied. "That 5 minutes you played the other night, that was more powerful than most concerts I've sat through." She didn't know what to say. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a card. It was plain with a small logo and his name on it, but on the back he had written a time. "In place, there's a small event tomorrow. A few people, artists, musicians, creators. Nothing big, just a space to share. If you feel ready, show up. If not, no pressure." She stared at the card for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That night at home, she placed the card on the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys. A small smile formed on her face. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she felt something she hadn't felt in years possibility. She played until her eyes grew heavy. The broken piano didn't sound perfect, but somehow it felt just right. The next evening came faster than she expected. All day at the restaurant, her mind was elsewhere. She poured water, cleared tables, and smiled at customers. But her heart kept beating faster each time she remembered the card sitting on her piano. The time written on the back was for 8 p.m. As her shift ended, she stood in the back changing out of her work clothes. She looked at herself in the mirror-tired eyes, simple clothes, worn shoes. Nothing about her screamed musician. Da 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 Still, she picked up her old satchel and left quietly through the back door. The address on the card was in a quieter part of town, far from the noise and bright lights. She took the bus, then walked 2 blocks. The building was small, almost hidden between 2 larger ones. Narrow sign above the door read "Open Studio." Warm light spilled from the windows. She paused outside for a moment, staring at the door. She could still turn back. No one would blame her. But she pushed it open. Inside, the space was cozy, with soft chairs, scattered lamps, and paintings on the walls. A few people sat in a small circle near the front. Some held guitars, others notebooks. One person was sketching quietly in a corner. A few looked up as she walked in, but no one stared. The atmosphere was calm, friendly, peaceful. The man from the restaurant was there, sitting off to the side. He gave her a small nod when he saw her, as if to say, "Glad you came, no pressure." She nodded back. After a short while, a woman stood up and welcomed everyone. "This is not a show," she said. "It's just a space to share, whatever you're working on. Music, poems, art, anything. You can speak. Or not, you can play. Or just listen." People began taking turns. A young man read a short story. A girl with a cracked guitar played a simple song. An older man shared a poem about his daughter. Energy was kind. No one judged. No one tried to be perfect. She listened quietly, her hands resting on her lap. Then, almost without thinking, she stood up when the next pause came. Her legs felt shaky, her heart pounded. But something inside her said, now or never. She walked to the upright piano at the front. It was old, the bench a bit wobbly, but the keys looked clean and well cared for. She sat down, took a breath, and began to play. She didn't introduce herself, didn't explain her story. She just played. This time, it wasn't a sad melody. It started slow, but then grew into something gentle, something full of light. A mix of old memories and quiet hope. Her fingers moved with care, not force. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. As the music filled the room, the people grew still. Some closed their eyes. Some swayed softly in their seats. No one spoke. The room became quiet, except for the sound of the piano. When she finished, she sat for a moment, unsure what would happen, and the room filled with soft claps and warm smiles. Nothing loud, nothing over the top, just pure, kind appreciation. She stood and walked back to her seat. One woman reached out and squeezed her hand gently. The man who invited her gave her a look of quiet respect. Something had shifted, not just in the room, but inside her. On the way home that night, she didn't take the bus. She walked. The air was cool, and the streets were mostly empty. She looked up at the sky. It had been a long time since she felt this kind of peace. She didn't know where this road would lead, but for once, she wasn't afraid to follow it. Weeks passed. Life at the restaurant continued as usual, but the waitress had changed. She still worked hard, still stayed quiet, but now she walked with more purpose. Something inside her had opened. The part of her that had been asleep for years was finally awake again. She started going to the small studio every week. It became her place of peace. She played new music there, sometimes soft and slow, sometimes full of energy. The people who came were kind and supportive. They didn't care about money or fame. They just cared about what came from the heart. And she gave them exactly that music from the heart. One evening, after a long shift, she found a letter waiting for her at the restaurant. It had no return address, just her name on the front. She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note and a printed invitation. The note was short. You have something rare. Don't let the world miss it. Use this chance if you feel ready. If not, keep playing anyway. Below, it was an invitation to perform at a private event. Small music gathering hosted by a foundation that supported unknown artists. The location was in a beautiful old theater downtown. The list of names included writers, painters, musicians, and some quiet sponsors. One of those sponsors, she guessed, was the man in the suit. She stared at the paper for a long time. Her hands were shaking a little. She felt nervous again, like the night she sat at the piano in the restaurant. But now something inside her said, you can do this. The night of the event arrived. She wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, and tied her hair back. Her mother helped her get ready, smiling the whole time. He would be proud, her mother said quietly, referring to the man they both missed. That sentence alone gave her strength. The theater was small but elegant, rows of chairs, soft lights, and a single grand piano at the center. The moment she stepped on stage, her heart pounded. But when she sat down and placed her fingers on the keys, she felt calm. This was where she belonged. The room listened in silence as she played. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just told her story through sound. Every key she pressed carried a piece of her journey, the years of silence, the pain of loss, the hope that had returned. It was raw. It was honest. It was beautiful. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a second, as if the music was still hanging in the air. Then came the applause, soft at first, then growing louder, till the whole room stood. After the show, many people came to speak with her. Some shared their own stories. Others just said thank you. A music teacher offered her lessons free of charge. A small label asked if she had written more pieces. One person simply said, "Don't stop." Later that night, she stood alone on the empty stage, looking out at the chairs. The piano sat behind her, quiet now. She closed her eyes and smiled. She remembered the night it all started, when a man in a suit dared her to play, not knowing who she really was, not knowing what would happen next. That single moment had changed everything, not because it made her famous, not because of the money, but because it reminded her of who she was and what she was meant to do. She wasn't just a waitress, she was a musician. And finally, the world was listening.